Hello, and welcome to this workshop on generative AI and applications in legal practice. So I'm popping in just quickly before the actual workshop takes place. This is a recording, obviously, of the workshop. And during the live workshop, I actually forgot to record my screen. So this also serves as sort of a heads up to let you know that as you're watching this, the screen recording was recorded after the fact. So I went back and made sure that you had the same kind of experience as if you were attending live. So you probably will see on the screen currently a screen capture of a real-time voice transcription and translation app I built with the help of AI, an AI assistant called Claude. So I'll pop back in just a little bit to explain exactly what's going on here. But just know this was running the entire time that the workshop was running to give participants the ability to have the same experience for non-native English speakers. And in this case, since it was a large Portuguese audience, we translated this workshop into Portuguese so that they could follow along a little bit better. So without further ado, let's get into the workshop.
Are we live, Kyle?
We should be live, yes.
Oh, yes.
So.
Okay, Kyle, this is a great pleasure. We're here in this wonderful night to talk about AI. And Judy, this is a great dream to be back after so many times. We did some webinars in 2020, 2021. This is, if I'm not wrong, the webinar number 16 since we started. We had 15 webinars over there. And then we said, let's start doing again this, because that's a very good way of connecting people and talking about a very strong topic, Judy.
So I do want, on behalf of Boston College Law School, I'd like to welcome everybody here. Again, since this webinar is designed to share some of our expertise at BC Law School, I wanted to alert folks to two programs that may be of particular interest. And Kyle, I don't know if you want to share your PowerPoint at this point.
Yep.
The first is a program
I'll share it.
Okay, program coming up on August 12th to 16th, a one-week program called Insights into U.S. Law. That program is designed it's all online. Half the sessions are synchronous, so you go online and the professor's talking to you and you can ask questions. The other half of the sessions are asynchronous, especially folks who are working. It works better for them. Then you have a follow-up Q&A with the professor involved. The Insights is a great way for folks to get a quick a one-week introduction to U.S. law, and also to test your legal English if you're interested in studying law in the U.S. So later, Kyle, you're sharing your PowerPoint for everybody later on, right? So you'll see if you go to slide 2, there's information about how to sign up for Insights, and that, or if you simply Google Boston College Insights into U.S. Law, you'll find it. On the next slide, the second general program you might be interested in is our LLM program. That is a one-year graduate level program for folks who, for most people, have their legal degree in your home country. And as you know, the LLM generally, if you follow the rules correctly, can allow you to take the bar. We now are adding an SJD program as well. So folks who have a very strong academic bent, we're very excited about that. Folks interested in that program you can find information online and contact Ann Sullivan, our wonderful new Assistant Director of LLM and Global Programs. So just in addition to tonight's program, we have these other opportunities you may be interested in. So I will now turn it over to Kyle Fidalgo. And thank Pedro, we're so grateful, Professor Lenza, for all you do to spread the word. And Kyle Fidalgo is our leader of technology training at BC Law School. Think of him as Moses leading us out of the wilderness. Hopefully, he'll be leading you as well. Kyle?
Wow. Well, thank you for that intro. That's quite the intro. A lot to live up to. Hopefully, I appease everybody here. So I did see a question already from the chat to ask for Portuguese, which we will be providing some live captioning in Portuguese in just a moment. So let me.
Caio, sorry, if you don't mind, Caio, sorry for interrupting you. I'm live here on Instagram, and I'm just gonna invite our friends to join us on Zoom. And if you don't mind, I'm gonna speak in Portuguese with them, and then we come back while you are preparing the translation into Portuguese. So, just talking to my Instagram friends here. Pessoal, a gente vai entrar agora. Vou desligar aqui e queria convidar todos vocês para que possam vir para o ao vivo que está acontecendo no Zoom. Vocês se inscrevem pelo canal, pelo link que está na minha bio, e de lá você recebe o link do Zoom. E vai ter tradução, sim, simultânea, durante todo o evento. A tradução está sendo feita por inteligência artificial, então eu quero que todos possam vir para cá. Então, você, por favor, o link está na minha bio, você se inscreve e recebe no seu e-mail o link do Zoom, e aí você vem para cá. Então, vou desligar e agradeço se puder divulgar para todo mundo. Muito obrigado, gente. So, Caio, I just talked with my audience in Portuguese that I was inviting them to come to our webinar, and I said, we're going to have translation from English into Portuguese, and this translation is made by artificial intelligence and also by a very strong ability that you have as a coder. So if you can explain a little bit about this translation, because it's something amazing. For the first time, we are able to do the translation with the audience into Portuguese. So if you can share a little bit how it happened and how was the technology used there.
Okay, we're back to talk about this voice translation app really quickly. I might repeat a few things that I said during the recording, so please forgive me if I do. But in general, I wanted to just show you, at least as part of the recorded version of this, a little bit of a preview of how this thing works. So I talk about this briefly inside of the workshop, but in general, when I was asked to give this talk, I thought, okay, what are some interesting ways I could show off the power of different AI tools? How does a human with expertise in certain areas, how do they enhance their productivity or be able to bring things to fruition a little bit quicker with the help and aid of using an AI tool? So I thought, why not build a quick real-time voice translation app? And essentially what this does, it does a couple things, but it takes my microphone input from my computer and sends it off to a special AI service for Microsoft. It's not so important to understand the inner workings of this, but what it does is it takes my audio, sends it to an AI interface that then transcribes it into English. And you can see here, I have an original text sort of area where it's actually transcribing my audio in my native language. And it does a really good job at doing that. Then in the translated tab here, this is where the transcription then also goes through another AI service that translates my text into Portuguese. Now, this isn't looking at some type of real-time sort of like one-to-one dictionary. This is sending it to an AI tool that is doing the predictions for changing my language into Portuguese. And you'll hear us talk about this tool periodically throughout the workshop. So I just wanted to give you an example of what it looks like working in real time. So that way you get a better sense later on as we're talking about this, what might be going on. So, you know, not to scare you off a little bit too much, but I did show off the code in the workshop, so I'll show it off a little bit here. But basically between myself, who has a little bit of coding background, a little bit of coding knowledge, I wouldn't say I'm, you know, very, very good by any means. I mean, I've built some applications before, but, you know, I'm hit or miss. I do it rarely, so the the startup time for me is pretty big when I have to go sit down and do a new project. But with the power of AI acting as a co-intelligence, or in this case, a co-developer, I gave it sort of my requirements for what language I wanted to use, what services I wanted to use, and it helped me build out this entire app, basically. So all of the core functionality that you see here, was largely an iterative process going back and forth between myself and an AI tool. I used Anthropic's Claude for this specifically, and you'll hear me talk about this more throughout the workshop. So apologies, I just had the translation hidden here, but you should be able to see the rest of the translation in the closed captions for the rest of this workshop. So that's it here. I hope you enjoy the rest of the workshop.
Hey, Kyle, I'm fascinated. This is my dream. Every time we did the webinars in the past, I wanted, because I have a lot of a great audience from Brazil. So this is amazing, and thank you so much for being part of this tonight. And just for us to know, if you don't mind, and if you can also, I don't know if it's possible for us to make a poll and ask in our audience here, how many people speak Portuguese? Eu perguntei para o Caio se, porque toda vez que eu faço a minha manifestação, como está no computador dele, não vem a tradução. Então, eu perguntei para que ele fizesse uma pergunta e respondesse da nossa audiência quem é que fala português. Então, se vocês puderem clicar. Caio, can you explain? We have just to click, and how does it work to answer?
Yes, I did throw the link to the poll in the chat, so you can access it there, or you can open up a new web page and navigate to this web address here, pollev.com/lawedtech. It should allow you to log in and start answering here. So we'll see the responses streaming.
Is this the link to the poll is in the chat? Is this?
Yes.
Oh, I don't see it. Should I see it or not? That's for everyone, or?
You should see it. Yes, I did send it to everyone.
Oh, yeah. Okay, perfect. So we click in the link, and then quem puder responder, então, que fala português, eu queria saber. And can we know the number of people that answered or not?
We should be able to see this.
Oh, okay.
Well, we've got 100% so far. I don't know what the count is.
Okay. I just answered. But anyway, that's interesting.
I'll come check back on this poll. I'll leave it active so people can fill it out if they like. So I do have a lot to get through tonight. As you can imagine, AI is a pretty vast topic. I could spend any one of the little subjects I go into tonight, I could spend an entire hour just on each one of them. So my goal really for you all, let me back up 1 second, is to bring a lot of these complex concepts, topics, definitions, sort of down to earth. So they're easy to understand, and hopefully you'll be able to walk away from this webinar and be able to put them in practice immediately. There's a lot of high-level talk about AI, and there's a lot of good discussion going on about like the ethics and morals and biases and different ways to use it at a general level, which are all great and super important. And what I like to do is share sort of the important things that I found using these tools almost on a daily basis the past year and a half, 2 years, that are most relevant for getting the most out of them. So to start, what I would like to do is just share something fun that I've done with AI. So I've already shown you this real-time voice translation. But another thing that I use AI quite a bit, actually, is for translation. So what I did was I asked ChatGPT, one of the AI chat assistants, to translate a welcome message for you here. So hopefully it did a good job. And with another tool called ElevenLabs, I'm actually able to bring this to life in my own voice, and it will speak in my tonality and all that kind of thing in a foreign language. And I don't happen to speak Portuguese, but I'll just give you a brief example of what that might sound like if I did.
Olá, pessoal. Estou muito feliz por ter a oportunidade de ajudar vocês a aprender sobre inteligência artificial esta noite. Meu objetivo é descomplicar alguns dos tópicos confusos e complicados sobre IA, transformando-os em exemplos fáceis de entender. Vocês aprenderão os conceitos e termos
So that just gives you a brief example. It probably sounded a little goofy. It might not have pronounced everything properly, but it obviously did a much better job than I would have if I had attempted that myself. What do you think, Pedro? Was it okay?
Hey, Kyle, I have to say the pronunciation was fantastic. Was very fluently, like you were native, but we could feel like an accent of how to say from that's a nice accent from the countryside. I don't know if this is the correct word, but anyway, when I talk, I had another interesting experience with ChatGPT, and I was discussing with ChatGPT in English. And oh no, I was discussing in Portuguese. Yes, and the accent was the same kind of accent that you just showed in your voice. And this was a very interested experience, Kyle. That I was. You said that you built up the translation discussing with the artificial intelligence. You're discussing with the robot, and then gave you suggestions, and you got into this wonderful project. And one day I started talking with ChatGPT and discussing a specific topic on my subject, that is constitutional law. And it was crazy, the quality of the discussion that I have with ChatGPT and the level of the discussion. And then it is something that's something crazy, because I was talking to the machine. The machine, it seems to be a friend of mine, and we were talking like a human. I got a call from my mom. She was very worried, saying, Pedro, what's going on? I said, no, don't worry. I'm discussing an important topic. But the level of the conversation was something incredible. Let me just do a short translation about that. Para aqueles que falam português, talvez a nossa grande audiência de hoje, eu contei de uma experiência que eu tive falando com o ChatGPT, até aqueles que me acompanham no Instagram viram, e que eu fiquei impressionado com a qualidade de conteúdo do ChatGPT discutir um tópico de direito constitucional. E eu até comentei que o acento dele, né, ele falou como estava a tradução, é muito parecido com esse, um pouco o acento do interior de São Paulo, assim, eu não sei se eu estou falando, se é isso mesmo, se vocês também pensam assim. Mas, de toda forma, a qualidade ela é impressionante. It is something incredible, Kyle. And I also, just to give a second example that what happened with me in chat, I got as a legal consultant, a legal
Consultation.
professor, consultation. I got a group of people wanted me to do a legal opinion about a specific topic. And then I was not sure if I was able to answer this and to give my opinion, if I agreed it or not. It was a big discussion. And I said, let's see what Chat thinks about. And then I gave all the input and all the information to Chat. And at the end, Chat said, yes, the correct should be this and this. That was according to what they wanted me to give my legal opinion. But at the end, I said, I'm so sorry, Chat. I don't agree with you. I'm not taking this case. Sorry. So it was something very interesting, because I disagree with Chat. And I say, I'm not taking this. And just quick translation, because we see my translation is not being, doesn't help, is not wrong because it's in your computer. Just
That's right. Yeah, unfortunately, it's just my own computer that's picking it up.
Yeah. Então, só para dar uma tradução rápida, porque a minha voz não está... esse programa está no computador do Caio, mas eu contei para ele que nessa interação com a máquina, eu uma vez, recentemente, tive um pedido para fazer um parecer jurídico sobre um tema, e aí eu não estava muito certo sobre alguns aspectos do tema, e comecei uma discussão eu, sozinho, com o chat, para saber o que chegava. E aí, ao final, o chat disse, você tem razão, o tema é bom, você pode pegar, mas eu discuti, eu criei algumas objeções e não concordei com o que o chat me sugeriu e não peguei o caso, então, para dar o parecer jurídico. Então, realmente, o uso da ferramenta do ChatGPT faz muito sentido também se você está fazendo uma petição, se você está fazendo um trabalho para criar uma discussão e trazer elementos de como seria aquela solução. E, eventualmente, você discordar, mas ele fez você pensar naquela matéria. Caio, keep up. That's fantastic.
Okay, so one bit of housekeeping. I'm just going to ask if you all don't mind. I might open up the chat so people can actually ask questions directly in the chat. Is that something you'd be okay with?
Totally.
Okay, so I noticed, sorry about that, everybody. I saw a few hands raised and things like that. So feel free to have communication in the webinar chat. I've just opened that up so you can ask questions and we'll do our best to reach you there. So let's move on. Like I said, I've got a lot to get through. We've done a lot of talking about some of these tools, but haven't put a pin on what we're talking about when we discuss the term artificial intelligence or AI. So I want to give a quick 10,000-foot view here. And just so you know, a lot of the artwork that is in this presentation was also generated by different AI tools. And after this webinar, I'll share the slides if you would all like to see them. And I've put the different prompts that I use actually in the slide notes section. So you can kind of see the tools I'm using and the different prompts that I use to get these images. But for the sake of this conversation, we're going to be talking about a more narrow field of AI called generative AI, which is sort of what has brought on this AI explosion in the past year and a half with the release of ChatGPT. So recently I watched a talk from Jensen Huang, who's the president and CEO of NVIDIA, one of the major chip companies in the globe, and they just became one of the most valuable companies in the world, actually. And these chips are basically running all of the computing power behind these AI tools. And he sort of coined the term that, we're in an AI Big Bang sort of era right now. And this all started in November 30th, 2022 with the release of ChatGPT with their model called GPT 3.5. And don't worry, I'm going to cover what all of these acronyms and things mean in just a minute. But this was sort of the release of that initial large language model, which allows you to talk with a computer like Pedro was just saying a second ago, like a friend or something, like a colleague, an assistant, any of those kinds of things with just human natural language. So in March, the following year, they released GPT-4, which was much more powerful, much more capable, but it was behind a paid subscription. So you had to pay for it. It was $20 a month. And then you could use their latest and greatest model, which, increases their reasoning capabilities, their abilities to sound more human, their abilities to give you more useful output, things along those lines. And I have an asterisk there because in the fall, they released a more advanced model of GPT-4. And then this year, May 13th of this year, they released their latest model called GPT-4o. And the O stands for Omni, and what this means is it can actually take in and understand images, audio, text, all of these things natively. And again, I'll be diving deep into what I'm talking about when I mean like it understands these things in a multimodal sense. So let's look at the big players in this space. Some of you might already be familiar with this, but again, when I'm talking about these AI chat assistants, these large language model tools, this is something that just the open public can interact with. They could talk with it. They don't need to be a computer scientist or engineer. They don't have to know how to code. They could just use their language and get some really awesome results that way. So the first one is OpenAI. Their chat product is called ChatGPT. There's another company called Anthropic. Their version of a chat assistant is called Claude. And then Google has their own called Gemini. And the names of these tools is what's called a foundational model or a frontier model. They're their best artificial intelligent models available to date. And what they do is they'll end up releasing these tools, and then usually their best ones are reserved for a paid subscription. And as of a couple months ago, all of these companies now have released their latest models for free, which is amazing. It's fantastic, actually. Albeit you have to be restricted to how many conversations you can have with it. Maybe you can only have 10 to 12 chats at a time, and then it will force you to wait, and so on and so forth. But at least you're able to access these tools at a free basis here. Sorry, I'm just going to check and make sure I'm not missing anything. Yeah, so we had a question about NVIDIA here. I'm just making sure all my windows are set up properly. I was missing this here. I just want to make sure. Some of these slides I have like specific facts I wanted to talk about. I want to make sure I don't mess those up. Yeah, so NVIDIA, there was a question about NVIDIA reaching the peak of the most valuable companies. It's just because they were a first mover really in this space in terms of creating the chips that were powerful enough to train these models, which I'll be getting to in a little bit. But it takes a lot of computing power to do that. And they just happen to be at the forefront of developing that technology. And then had agreements with all of these different companies. And now that everybody is making a play for creating different AI models and things along those lines, it just so happens that they need that hardware infrastructure to be able to do that, which is why they've become so valuable recently. So these are the big players. There are other models available. There's also more models tailored specifically to various industries. And again, since this is meant to be kind of an intro into AI and some of the best ways to use it, and especially some specific examples for the legal practice, I won't have too much time to get into those, but there's also open source models as well, which basically just means that the code is available and open to anybody that has a computer and can download it. They can actually train these models on their own. They can run it locally on their machine and actually interact with the chat model without having to go to the internet to use some of these. So let's talk a little bit about just some fundamentals, get everybody on the same level playing field here when I'm talking about AI tools. The first thing I'll cover, I keep saying the word GPT. It's in the name, ChatGPT, the company OpenAI that created that chat tool. So let's take a look at what the letters stand for here. So the first one, in case you weren't aware, stands for generative, which is pretty straightforward, right? It's generating text. It also is capable of generating images. And pretty soon it's also going to be, you're going to be able to generate audio with it as well, and video and things like that. So that's what the G stands for. Then we got P. Of course, I've got this cute little cat doing some weightlifting for the pre-training phase. This is the phase when you're building these models where they're actually consuming all of the data and the different algorithms that these AI engineers are building. That's what is sort of guiding the AI model to teach itself about relationships between words and so forth, and how it's able to converse with us naturally. And then you've got transformer. So the transformer is a kind of special piece to this whole puzzle that's sort of allowed this AI Big Bang to happen. So what a transformer is, it's a special type of AI algorithm, just a kind of the way the code works under the hood, where it will go and figure out all the different relationships between the text all at once. So similar to how we read a paragraph, right? We're reading one word at a time. Well, the transformer architecture is something that was talked about in a research paper. It's pretty famous now. If you've done any kind of like looking into AI recently, you probably have heard this. It's called Attention is All You Need. It was a Google DeepMind research paper. And what it talks about is the fact that these tools now, they can see the entire text that you're trying to send to these tools to either talk with or ask questions about. It can see everything all at once, and then it helps inform those next word predictions as it goes. So don't worry if you're a little lost now. I'm going to break this down even further in just a second.
Caio, if you were talking about this transformer, and just to be sure if I understood, so I'm a law professor, and sometimes no, very often we need to understand some decisions of the Supreme Court in Brazil. And those decisions are written, and sometimes they are very long. And so there was one day recently that I wanted to discuss a specific topic about a decision of the Supreme Court. And this document has more, let's say, 150 pages, let's say 200 pages. And for this to be read by myself as a professor, I will take at least to read very well, at least, let's say, 1 to 2 days. Understand how the decision, the discussion, etc. So I uploaded the PDF on ChatGPT, and I asked for ChatGPT to read the decision, and it read in, let's say, seconds. It was something incredible. And I asked for a summary, and it was a very strong and good summary. So if you can say something about this, and if it's what you're talking about, the transformer or not, but it was something incredible, Kyle. I really, I'm very, I don't know. It's something I'm kind of worried what's going to happen in the future.
Yes. Yeah. So the capabilities of these tools are, they're evolving at a very rapid pace. And what you're talking about, which I'll get to in a little bit, but I'll kind of allude to it, is something known as the context window. It's how much text you can upload to these tools at once and have them understand all of the text. And as of right now, a lot of these tools, I'll be getting to this here in just a second, I think, but they have very large context windows to the point where you can upload massive PDFs, documents. Some of them have large enough context windows where you can even upload like the entire Harry Potter book series, for example. Not a legal example, but you could upload court decisions from the entire year and then talk to it about that, which is pretty fantastic, and something that you can do with those. And then all of a sudden you've got a really smart expert like legal assistant, let's say, or a law clerk that you could then talk to and ask questions and work through any question that you have about the document, which is pretty amazing. So moving on here, we've got another term that I just want to briefly touch on, which is the LLM. I'm sure a lot of you have heard this at this point. It just stands for large language model. Again, it's a type of AI. There are many different types of AI technologies, deep learning, neural networks, all of these different very technical terms. And, I'll just say right now too, like, you don't have to know all of these things in order to use these tools successfully. That's kind of the amazing benefit now that they've released this to the public like this, is that we can interact with these just, again, with our natural language. That's kind of the power of these tools right now. So a really quick definition of how these generative AI tools work. And I promise by the end of this workshop, you're going to understand everything on this slide. Right now, it might just look like a foreign language to you. But here's high-level things that are helpful to know when you're interacting with this. So LLMs, large language models, are autoregressive next token predictors. They're trained on vast amounts of data, text, typically, and they're programmed to teach themselves relationships between words and ideas. So they're given, just as an example, the entire corpus of the internet, all of the text that's found on the internet, something upwards of tens of trillions of words. They're given all of this data and then some complex algorithms and ways to sort of teach themselves how to make those relationships. And that's how they figure out how to basically talk with us in a natural language. And then after that kind of pre-training phase, that's like the P and the GPT, then they're fine-tuned with human feedback so that they're actually conversational and helpful to work with. So a lot of times, like these base models, before they're fine-tuned, they're really just next word predictors. And then the fact that they're able to be fine-tuned with human feedback, there's actually someone, working with these models and saying, okay, I put this prompt in, I got this output out. They're labeling it in certain ways and then feeding that back into the model so that it interacts with us in a more helpful way. And again, you're going to know, I'm going to walk through that whole process in just a second with a concrete example so you can actually hopefully pick it up. So I said that LLMs are next token predictors. Well, what is a token? Humans don't think in tokens. Tokens are simply just representations of words. So a lot of times it might be an entire word, it might be a part of a word, or even just a single character in a word. But just know that on average, about 3/4 of a word equals one token. From here on out, we're just going to talk about the way these tools predict things in terms of words, because that's what makes sense to us, right? Where tokens come into play is the context window. So like Pedro mentioned, he was able to upload a very large PDF, hundreds of pages, and be able to talk to it. The context window is the model's short-term memory. That's the best way you can think about it. it's basically the length of conversation that you can have, and it's measured in tokens, and it includes a couple different things here. So it includes something known as the system prompt or custom instructions. This isn't something that you put into the tool. This is something that happens behind the scenes. The 3 companies and more that create these tools, they put this at a layer that you don't see, and it's basically telling the chat assistant things like, here's how you should interact with the users, you're a helpful assistant, you can help with these things, and some other special instructions basically to help it be more useful for you. Then you've got your own query and prompt, which is just what you type in to the window. So, very easy to do. You just type it in a text box. I'll pull up ChatGPT behind here. So I didn't get to this little example that I pulled up, kind of a more fun, quirky example. But this is ChatGPT. You type in your prompt in this text box. I'll come back to this in a second if we've got time. Let's see. And then you've got the model's output. So this is just the response that's given to you by the AI tool. So all these 3 things count against your token limit here in the context window. And one thing just to know before I move on to the next slide is that, some people ask, hey, what happens if you get outside the token limit or the context window? Well, generally, that's when the conversation just becomes a little less reliable. It might start to hallucinate more, and I'll get to the term hallucinate in a second. But really quickly, it's just how the tool can confidently tell you false information as if it were true. Or it also might just go outside of the scope of the conversation. It might start to not act or behave in a way that you anticipated when you're outside of the context window there. So that's what happens there. Let's take a look at what each of these tools have in terms of a context window and what their token limits are. And remember, a token is about 3/4 of a word. So if you multiply any one of these numbers by 3/4, you'll get the word count, essentially, for each of these tools. So let's just say, let's do a little experiment here. I'm going to come over to ChatGPT. Okay, switching gears, because I want to show off a couple features of these tools as we go. I'm going to use a tool called Advanced Data Analysis or Code Interpreter to have it actually do some math for us inside of the browser. Sorry, just give me one sec while I type this out. Typing and doing demos in real time always seems painful for the person doing it. And obviously, this is something very easy that a calculator could do or something along those lines. But one of the knocks that sometimes people give to these tools is they can't natively do math just by talking to them like this. But they do have the ability to actually run code directly inside of the browser. And I'm going to show another example of that here in a second. And of course, it looks like it's hanging up on me. Let me just refresh the page. I'll copy this so I don't lose it.
Caio, do you mind reading your question so that we have the translation into Portuguese?
Yes, absolutely. So let's see. Is the database of these artificial intelligence the same? And where do they search for answers? Great question. So the database, these tools aren't actually going to a database to find answers for you. So that is one thing that it's a misconception that people have. AI tools, they're not search boxes, they're not tied to a database in any way that we think about them, where you're used to going to a search engine, typing in a search, it goes and looks to see if it's in its database or knowledge base, and it would surface it if it was there, and if it's not, it doesn't return it to you. And this is the kind of a new paradigm with these AI models is that, if they can't faithfully replicate an answer by predicting the next word in a sequence, then they will potentially make things up and just, called hallucinating, but lying, whatever it is you want to call it. They're not really doing it on purpose. It's just, it's all predictive probabilities trying to come up with an answer for you. So in general, they have a sort of a base database that they've been trained on in terms of like the text that they've seen, knowledge bases. And this is one thing that you'll see more and more is OpenAI has been kind of on a tear recently. They've been acquiring a lot of different companies for better quality data, or they've been partnering with things like publications and news outlets and things like that to get higher quality sources of data to train their models on. And there's also some sort of fancy mechanics going on behind the scenes where they're able to now cite sometimes where they get certain information from. But just know in general, when you're typing in a question, it's not really going to a database. It's predicting the next word based off of all the probabilities that it's trained itself on. In my opinion, is the use of AI safe without regulation? I think, this might be a little out of my scope of area of expertise, to be honest with you. I think that it depends. That's probably going to be an answer I say a lot for certain questions, but it depends on what you're using it for, right? If you're doing things like this, kind of goofy examples, I'm not that worried about doing stuff like that. If you're using it for, again, like we'll get into some legal scenarios later on, but when you're using it for like client work or, you're potentially putting in protected information into these systems, then yes, absolutely. You definitely want to take caution with that and be very aware of what you're putting into them. I'm willing and open to let these tools use my conversations as like extra training and things like that. And that's also where certain companies are paying for the privilege basically to have gated systems where none of the conversations they're having with it are being trained further on these models. It's not going out anywhere. It's staying in-house basically. So, I definitely think that I think it's safe without regulation at this point, but it's definitely needs to be a conversation, an ongoing conversation, something we are very carefully looking at. So anyway, we've got our results here. So around 96,000 words if we were to use this. So this is something some people aren't aware of. This used to be reserved for the paid version, again, of ChatGPT 4.0, but now everybody can use these advanced features. So let's get back here. I saw one more question come in. Let's see if I can answer that quickly. Yes, so boundaries in terms of ethics. I do have a slide on sort of like biases and ethics and morals and things like that coming up in just a bit, so I might be able to answer your question then. Okay, so I have another quick demo for you, but let's see what this whole autoregressive next token prediction actually looks like in action. So I mentioned this other tool called Claude. Let's see, it looks like the page needs to be refreshed. Where I had a conversation with it. I pasted, this actually took 2 different conversations, but I was able to paste a screenshot of another sort of like sample tool that I had it built for me. And my request, you can see my chat here. So I'm asking it to help me generate an interactive web page to demonstrate this ability of LLMs to auto-regressively generate the next token in a sequence. It had originally given me some React code, which is a web development code here. And it gave me this whole little application, and I wasn't really happy with how it was working. So this is one of those things that as you're working with AI tools, you'll learn that it's a very iterative process. And oftentimes you end up spending quite a bit of time working with these tools when you actually want to get like a good response out of them. So anyway, that was just to kind of show that you can upload images, you can upload video, audio, text, all that kind of thing. So auto-regressively predicting a next token. What does that mean? Hopefully this demo solidifies it. I also asked it to give me both English and a button to change it into Portuguese. So there you go. I might change it back to Portuguese at the end here in case you want to read it. But in this example, so let's say I'm prompting a tool and the user puts in, the user being me, create a cute and short sentence of about 5 to 7 words long about law school. Again, this is not like earth-shattering examples here. We're not solving world peace with this, but it helps demonstrate a point. We've got what's going to be coming from the AI response kind of queued up. So how it works, remember, it's been trained on all this information before, which helps inform its decision to predict the next word in the sequence. So it will take in all of the text that's been put into it, system prompt from these companies, my prompt, which in this case is just a very quick prompt, a very easy query. And what it will do, paying attention to everything that's been put into it all at once, it will start to consider all the different possibilities. So if I click next, we'll kind of like go through what that sequence looks like. So first, it generates law. It's like, okay, I'm going to create this sentence. Let's start with the word law. And it assigns probabilities to each of the different words that it thinks it's going to predict. And probably because I told it I was doing a bilingual type of workshop here, it threw in some looks like Portuguese words into this as well, which is kind of funny. So anyway, this is all made up, right? This is just for example purposes, but we generate the word law. So then the next word, and it's obviously it does this very rapidly, but as we go through, it says, okay, school. Then this graph here is representing what the next words in the sequence might be. So in this case, it's saying, okay, I've assigned the highest probability to makes. And again, it's keeping, at this point, we've got the whole user query, we have law school, and now it's looking at all of that with all of its training data to identify the next word, and so on and so forth. So if I just click next through here, same thing. Now it's got all of this information, law school makes, and that's how it informs its decision to select dreams, and so on and so forth. So that's basically how these tools work in a nutshell. So they're just predicting what the next possible word in the sequence is going to be. And this is obviously an oversimplification of it. There's a lot of complex computation going on here. But at a very high level, this is what's happening. I'll flip it back to Portuguese for just a second. I see some other hands going up here. Yeah, if you have questions, go ahead and put them in the chat, and I'll see if I can get to them, hopefully. So, in that demo, this is me and an AI, again, working together. This is the code that it wrote to come up with this whole thing. You don't have to be a developer to do this. I didn't write a single line of this. I just said, hey, do this for me. It created a couple versions. I wasn't happy with certain things, and I just asked it to tweak it on an iterative basis, just saying, okay, I don't like this, or I'd rather see this aspect of it, and you just talk back and forth as if it was a colleague. So I mentioned I was able to put an image into it. So that concept is just multimodal. I'm going to breeze past this. It's just the ability to put in multiple types of content into a chat window and have the AI be able to reason about it and understand what you're talking about. Okay, so here's a quick example. I've sprinkled in a few of these prompts in here just to get your wheels turning in terms of things that you can ask these tools. So let's look at this example. Maybe you're writing a speech or you're writing an argument in court or something, but you need some help crafting a more compelling argument or narrative or story around it. And you would you would like to include some information for the tool to consider, and then you ask it this prompt. So you say, hey, you assign it a role. You say, I'm going to act as an expert, or please act as an expert speechwriter. From there, you can draft an introduction for a persuasive speech, advocating for the protection of civil liberties, highlighting recent violations at, and those brackets are just, insert whatever scenario here. Maybe it's something you're working on, and you could just put in whatever that may be. You ask it to include some emotional appeals and factual evidence based on the documents and other resources provided. So, like I said before, this isn't going to a database to find this information. When you're working with a general tool such as ChatGPT or Claude, let me go back up. When you're working with a general knowledge chat tool such as that, if you do want it to have more up-to-date relevant information, then you should provide it. You can upload it as a PDF, a Word document. You can copy and paste text from websites. Some of these tools do have web search capabilities, so you can ask it, hey, go search the web. Here's this URL I want you to look at. And some websites now are blocking these tools from doing that kind of thing, so you have to be a little careful there. Just a little caveat. But if you do want it to have factual, relevant information, it's always best to include it as part of the prompt. And with these ever expanding context windows, you can include more and more information up front, which is nice. So just a couple ideas for like next steps, how you might improve this or work on this project would be to, maybe you decide you're going to iteratively work on the whole speech together. So I just said, draft the introduction. Breaking it down into a smaller component tends to work better for most models. But maybe you've got a bullet point outline or your own rough draft, and you want to go back and forth as a copy editor and improve on some things there. So that's one idea. You can also, you can ask for resources or ways to suggest actionable policy to implement the changes that you're hoping to enact. You can have it draft communication plans and organize all these things, and what other constituents or what other parties should we bring in to consider additional points of view. Who else would be helpful to bring into a project like this to see it through to fruition? All of those things are all fair game when you're talking with these tools. Okay, so a quick recap on the AI fundamental side of things. LLMs are just next token predictors or next word predictors. So I've linked to a YouTube link here. So if you want after this, actually, why don't I go ahead and share the whole slide with everybody so you've got them. You can follow along. I should have done that from the beginning. I'm sorry. I'm going to put this in the chat here for you. Yeah. LLM.
Sorry, excuse me.
Yeah.
Do you mind checking the translation? I think it seems.
Oh, did it stop?
Seems.
Yeah, it looks like it caps out at 20 minutes. So again, sorry, this is very much a test case to see if this would even work. Okay. Should be working better now. Okay. Yeah, it looks like it caps out at 20 minutes. My apologies, everybody.
Oh, yeah. Amazing. It's perfect. Now it's working. Oh, it's great.
Okay.
That's what. Okay, let's go.
All right. So this YouTube video, super helpful if you want to go even
Saving for
I won't make you listen to that, but super helpful for diving even deeper into what a GPT is. So if you want to know, all the ins and outs of how they function, that's a great video to watch. And you could check that out there. Remember, LLMs have a limited short-term memory called the context. Of course, that context fits in whatever context window that they've stated on their website. So they're getting larger and larger. And to be honest with you, at some point soon, that might be a solved problem. We might even not have to worry about how much information we put into these or how long our conversations are. LLMs work by taking in the entire context, everything inside of the chat, everything the system prompt that these companies have put in behind the scenes, and everything that they've generated so far to better predict the next token. And that's kind of the concept I want to get across and have stick with you, because it's really important when you're talking with these tools. If they start to go off the rails or they give you false information, it's always better to start a chat over rather than try and steer it back in the right direction, because that information or, bad output, whatever you want to categorize it as, since it's loaded up in the context, it might have a hard time getting away from that as the conversation moves on. I hope that makes sense.
Excuse me. What is the link you suggested for? There's a video set. Oh, it's there. Okay.
Yes, yeah, it's right there as part of the slides, which I just shared. So you'll
okay.
Yep,
Great.
you'll be able to get to all of these links and resources, including seeing some of my notes in the slides, if you'd like. LLMs can be steered or trained in context with some kind of special prompting tricks, which I have queued up for a little bit later. Of course, we're running a little short, so I'm going to see if I can get to at least some of the prompt tips for you. Okay, so using AI, here's some tips and considerations. I'm going to touch on some of the ethical questions that were brought up earlier. So let's talk real quick about challenges. Like, when maybe is it not the best time to use AI, or what is it not used best for? The first thing is, at a fundamental level, these tools still do not have what we consider as humans to be sort of the basic reasoning, planning, and common sense. They're not truly intelligent, hence the A, the artificial in the name, right? But they sure can mimic having a conversation, and they can even give us very productive quality output, but that still doesn't mean they're able to do this on their own. It all depends on like the training data and the different types of information you feed it as part of the prompt. So just know, that's not how they're working at a fundamental level here. So if you do ask it for reasoning or planning sort of things or multi-step actions that you want it to take, it's always best to break those down into much simpler components so that you're able to get the outcomes that you want. You also have to be careful with asking it for factually accurate and relevant information. And I've got an example of a prompt that asks for that coming up in a second. But this is where that hallucination problem comes in, where it might just make up facts and figures for you, depending on when their knowledge cutoff is. Like some of these tools are pretty recent. I think Claude is within the last month or so. ChatGPT is earlier this year, so on and so forth. So they're not always completely up to date. So if you're asking for, current events and things like that, you might start to get the tool to tell you false information and try and sell it to you as if it were actually true. Another kind of challenge of generative AI is things that you want to be 100% responsible for. So this is really important, I would say, for things like legal work, right? Where you don't want the AI tool to be making up things, or you need it to be 100% accurate if you're helping a client do something, or if you're writing a decision for a court, or you're coming up with any type of professional legal work that needs that accuracy and relevance, right? So anytime that you need to be responsible for fact checking, like if you handed this off to a legal assistant and you needed to be checking this behind the scenes or after they were done with their work product, then you should be doing the same thing with AI. You should never just hand things off and expect it to come back as a finished product. This is really essential, especially when you're handling complex and multi-step tasks. Again, similar to the complex reasoning point that I made earlier. Yeah, and I just saw another question. The hallucination depends on the quality of the question. It doesn't necessarily depend on the quality of the question, I would say. The hallucination kind of just depends on like what types of things you're asking it for. And this is a concept I've been thinking about and have talked about with some of our faculty here recently, but these tools kind of hallucinate by default, right? Like they're just predicting the next word, and it just turns out that with all of their training, most of the time it's right, and most of the time it's actually a pretty good answer. Sometimes it can be completely wrong, though, and that's still sort of a fault of these tools that is being worked on by these companies and so on. I would say like the quality of the question might come into play. It sort of depends, again, on the task you're asking it for. So I'll show an example of that in just a second. And I do have this little biases and ethics point here. Again, I really appreciate that question. This is a huge topic and something that's super important, and I think should be always in the back of your mind when you're using these tools, because of the types of training data that they've been trained on, which is basically all of the text found on the open internet, and then of course some custom training data sets and things like that. But that gets all of humanity: the good, the bad, the ugly, what have you. So there's research papers on there. There's useful discourse and topics that people are fruitfully talking about and like coming up with good ideas to progress humanity. Just like there's all of the negative things that you see online as well, like people fighting with each other and people not understanding like cultural differences or political differences and things like that. Racial biases, like all these different things that are super important in our society today that we're still working on, like that shows up in the training data too. So it's always important to keep that in mind when you're working with these tools. And in fact, there's some cases and research that show that some of these LLM tools actually amplify some of these implicit or invisible biases. A couple of quick examples, you might have seen, I'm just going to highlight the image generation piece here, but, when Google announced their multimodal tool that could generate images, people were, of course, everybody goes and tries to like break it or ask it to do all of these unruly things just to see how far they can push it. And it was generating images of, you know, like African American Nazis and like other like really disgusting historical representations of people and things that you don't want to be showing up inside of these tools. So that's obviously an issue. Then you've another example that I like to point to is there was a study where a company put resumes through an AI tool to do some kind of predictive analysis and see who would be the best candidate for a job. And so what they did was they tested it with essentially all things being equal, all the qualifications. They just changed the name at the top of the resume to, you know, one had sort of a typical Western white sounding name. And then the other had, you know, maybe a more ethnically ambiguous name or non-white sort of Western sounding name. And it skewed towards the white, actually white males even, I think, was what happened in the study, but it skewed towards those. So, you know, there's still some issues with this in these systems. And depending, again, on the use case, like if you're using it to create a fun song for your grandma, probably not an issue. But if you're using it to work with clients in the legal system, well, you can see really quickly how these biases and ethical implications really come into play. So it's just, you have to use your professional sort of expertise and discretion when you're using it with those kinds of things. All right, so here's kind of a bad example. This is one thing that, to your question about hallucination depends on the quality of the question. Well, this isn't necessarily the quality of the question so much as what it's asking it to do. So act as a social media strategist, identify and compile a list of key influencers who are likely to support our campaign for workers' rights. So maybe you're trying to get the word out about this. Include their contact information and a brief description of their audience and influence. So why would this be bad? This sounds like something an AI tool should be able to help with, right? Especially if they've got web browsing capabilities. You would think they'd be able to go out and do this kind of thing. Well, the problem that might come up, and probably would come up, is that using AI to identify, again, factual, up-to-date information is still just one of those limitations with current AI systems. They're predicting the next word in a sequence, really. And so whatever information that you give it, it's going to do its best to sort of satisfy the response for you. They're always very helpful to please. In fact, that's usually the first system prompt that shows up for these companies is, you are a helpful chat assistant who fill in the blank with whatever else they put into those. And even with web search capabilities, maybe they're not going to the correct website or an outdated source of information, or a website might have blockers that prevents these tools from crawling their sites and seeing this information. So it still might not be the best thing to do. You know, if this was a task that you did want to complete, maybe you upload a bio and some recent information from some of these people, if you had access to that, and then you would ask more questions about like, how would I reach out to this person, or, you know, get them to help out with this kind of thing. That might be a better way to approach this. You would figure out a different angle to use the AI tool for versus looking for that factually relevant, like biographical information, let's say. All right, Pedro, how are we doing on time? I know we're at an hour.
I think if it's okay for you, we can keep up, and I know we have a lot of things to talk. Just see your schedule. I'm sure everybody is very interested in. I'm learning a lot, Kyle. It's incredible.
Okay, great. Yeah, I mean, I'm happy I can talk about this for as long as you all want. So hopefully that's not a bad thing to hear. Okay. All right.
I think if we don't, this is something I'm totally convinced now. If for anyone, especially, I mean, not especially, but any career, we must know this. We must learn how to use it. And if we don't use it, we're going to be behind. What do you think about this?
I do think, you know, like most new tools, most new technologies, it's always good to at least learn the fundamentals. And because this is such a powerful new technology, in my opinion, yes, I mean, it's still in its early days, but I do think we're kind of getting to a point where, you know, you should definitely be hopping on the train if you haven't already, to at least learn it. start small. And I've got some tips later for getting started if you want. But the power that these things have, all the research that's backing it, how much it's helping people across all different industries is pretty amazing. And it's kind of hard to argue with that you should not be using these tools in some fashion. All right, so I talked a little bit about some things to be cautious of. So what are the strengths of these tools, especially for legal professionals? Let's try and be a little more specific here, or at least I'm going to try to be. I've given a few examples outside of that use case. So the first thing I'll just talk about, again, content generation. This is the bread and butter, or one of the bread and butter pieces of these tools. It's one of the things they excel at the most. And mainly it's because of how quickly and efficiently they create content. So Pedro mentioned earlier, he uploaded a huge PDF and was immediately able to talk to it within seconds. You can have a whole very deep conversation over the course of 15, 20 minutes with, the amount of text that would have taken you a couple days probably to really sit down and parse through and read effectively. So, you can have it help you draft legal opinions, of course, with giving it the right amount of information. You can have it generate decisions for you. You can have it help you write research papers, drafting memos, all these different things. And I think one important just note I'll put on that is, again, think of this as like a co-intelligence or a co-pilot, co-assistant, whatever you want to call it. It's a smart assistant that's always there to help you, right? So you might not have it create the whole thing from scratch. If you are looking at a blank page, maybe you get a little help getting started. But the real power of this comes, again, from your expertise when you can work with it and give it the right amount of information into the prompt to get way better, higher quality results a lot more quickly. So it can also help generate some things outside of your area of expertise. So maybe you want to get like a second opinion. You're talking with a colleague that's sort of in a neighboring area of expertise, maybe like socially like behavioral type of areas, or psychology, or sociology, something like that, where you need to learn a little bit more information. It's a good way to get up to speed so that maybe you're a little more informed when you do go talk to a colleague to actually do the work that you want to do. Because it's really good at taking on these and adapting these various roles and then putting that into the generated content. It's also pretty amazing at information processing. So summarizing, generalizing, extracting relevant information from huge amounts of text at a much greater speed and efficiency than we're capable of doing. And now with some of these multimodal models, you're able to do this with all different kinds of content, not just text, but you can do Google Gemini, for instance, will let you upload videos, or it can go and look at YouTube videos behind the scenes, and you can talk to them that way. Yes, co-counsel. I see that in the chat. Exactly. You could think about this as just a very smart, expert colleague that sort of just needs that little, like, very specific descriptive information to sort of get up and running to help you in the best way. So I've been saying this all along, but acting as a co-intelligence. So again, it's able to provide quick and helpful feedback and generate like second opinions on things. So you can just have a conversation. I'm thinking about this particular court decision or this particular case, and these are kind of my thoughts on it. Here's some information to help you. Can you help me just make sure I'm not missing anything here? Is there something obvious that I should be thinking about that I haven't brought up before? Or, take a look at this and really help me tear it apart. Like, should I be thinking about this from different angles? All these kinds of questions, again, they're very helpful to put into chat tools for this. I used it nonstop for this presentation to try and come up with examples, and was giving it pictures of my slides and saying, hey, I'm trying to explain these concepts. How would you think the best way to talk about this might be? I came up with the content myself, and then I use these tools as that sort of like bouncing bounce board or backboard. I don't know what I'm trying to say, but I think you get the idea. Just a helpful colleague to talk back and forth with to make sure I'm going down the right path.
Hey, Kyle, sorry for interrupting you. When you are doing this discussion with your colleague, let's say your the robot colleague, do you do this discussion speaking or you do it writing? Because now I don't know since when we are the example I gave you, we can talk and discuss, and because it's much easier for us maybe to talk. But
Yeah.
how do you prefer? What
Absolutely.
doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter. One thing I can, I could show you at least on the screen here. In most of the apps for these tools, you have the ability to actually talk here to them. So I'm going to raise up my phone in just a second and show you. But a lot of them have voice chat enabled, and that's actually a feature that ChatGPT announced a little while ago, and they're going to be rolling out later this year, where it's going to have a much more a lower latency in terms of like how quick it responds to you. It's going to be almost real time, as if you were talking to somebody. So, for instance, I've got my phone here. I can't see my video, so hopefully, let me just move a screen over. All right, so I've got my phone. I've got my ChatGPT app up here. So if I go into the audio, hey, I'm giving a talk on generative AI and legal practice. I'm trying to teach people about the basics of AI. Can you just say hello to my audience? We've got a mix of people that speak Portuguese and English.
Sure. Here's a greeting for your audience. Hello, everyone. Olá a todos. Thank you for joining us today to learn about generative AI and its applications in legal practice. We're excited to explore this fascinating topic together. Estamos animados.
Oh, it looks like it was going to speak in Portuguese. Sorry, I cut it off. But anyway, so you can talk to these tools. You can put in text. It doesn't matter.
Yeah, this was the conversation I told you I was discussing, and was incredible. And what was very interesting is that if I was talking in Portuguese, then I say, can you please reply this answer in French? So it doesn't matter the language.
No, it's
The chat doesn't
multilingual.
matter. If
Yeah.
you speak in Portuguese or in English and say reply in any language, it is incredible.
Yeah.
And Kyle, it is also possible to have this conversation in the desktop, in the PC, but you need to have a power, like a computer with the new system, not in the old one. So
It
this
is-
another thing I was also checking, and they should maybe change this in the future, because it's only possible to have a very updated system in Mac, on the Mac at least.
Right. Yeah. You do have to have a certain level of processor. I think it's the M1 chips or better, which is
Yes, that's true. That's the
yeah.
other one.
Now that's like 3 or 4 years old at this point. But yeah, anything before that, I don't think have enough power to
Yes,
run
that's
that.
true.
But yeah, somewhere.
This is the situation when my mom called me and say, Pedro, what's going on? Are you okay? We're talking to home. No, don't worry.
Gotcha. Yes. So let's see. Keep moving on here. But that was a good question. Continuing on with just some practical tips. I mean, some of this stuff hopefully is very basic or kind of obvious, but still good to review either way. So my first tip really is prepare to spend time learning about and working with AI. So step one, you're already here. You're learning about it. You've achieved that goal. But also on the spending time aspect, a lot of people, especially in the past when you didn't have those, the top level models available for free, they would log into ChatGPT. They would be using the free version, which was traditionally a subpar version of what was available if you paid for a subscription. And, they would be a little unimpressed maybe. And rightfully so. Sometimes, it wasn't working so well for like a lot of the different queries that people were trying to send to it. Whereas now, like the latest models are very good. Well, now that's not a thing anymore because every single company offers their frontier model, again, the top tier model, for free, which is amazing. And when you work with these things, you'll find pretty quickly, like once you get past sort of the novel uses for it, and you start to attempt to use it for more real world applications, more professional applications, things like that, you actually end up spending a lot of time going back and forth with these tools to get the results that you're looking for. And you're only going to learn what these tools are good for and what they're not good for as you use them over time. So that's kind of my call to action there is just, just start by spending some time with these tools. Let's see. Oh, another thing that you end up spending a lot of time doing, especially, this happens a lot in research or when you're trying to prepare for projects or other things, right? Like a lot of the time is spent aggregating, sorting through, parsing all of the content that you're trying to consume, right? Same thing goes for these AI tools. Like if you wanted to upload a series of PDFs or some research articles or news articles on certain things to help get you up to speed, organizing those things and coming up with the right information to feed the tool so that it has the most relevant data for you as part of the conversation. Sometimes that can take some time too. I've talked a lot about very technical things throughout this talk. You don't have to be an expert, though, in AI to use it effectively. So, it doesn't negate everything I've said, but you can start by simply having a conversation. You don't have to have fancy prompting techniques or anything to get good results. So just know that. Again, this came up earlier, but they're not just straight answer boxes or search boxes. They're not attached to a database per se. So you kind of have to be careful when you're looking at that and using these tools here. So if you're looking, again, 100% factual information, if it's something that, occurs or has shown up a lot in the training data, chances are it will give you a very factual and relevant answer. For some of the more obscure things, that's when you definitely need to use caution in your own discretion when you're taking its answers as they come in. Yeah, and then start with some low stakes things first. That's always my suggestion. Preferably something fun. So, I pulled this up before. I had ChatGPT create a bossa nova song for you. I told it I was giving a workshop. Can you create like some lyrics? And then I put it into this other tool called Suno, which creates music. So let's see if it will play for you.
All our friends from far and wide, in this AI journey we'll take a ride, from the courtrooms to the sky so blue. Let's explore what AI can do.
Okay, so I think you get the point there. Obviously a pretty fun just use for that, but the prompt was very simple. I'm just asking it, hey, can you generate this for me? And Suno created, AI generated all of the musical instrumentation you heard. It decided how to put it together. It created the voice. Of course, there's a lot of issues right now with some of these companies, Suno being one of them, in terms of like how they train their models and what types of IP they may or may not have consumed, maybe not the best ways, but this was free to do. You create this, you can have a lot of fun with it. You just tell it what style of music you want. You can make mix-ups and mashups of things, and off you go. Yeah, so don't forget, AI can also just be fun. It doesn't have to be all serious here. All right. So if you're all sticking with me, we're in it for the long haul now. So might as well finish up this workshop together, right? Yeah, I see ghostwriters will become extinct. Yeah, maybe not. I mean, actually, that's a purpose that I use AI for all the time. I have a special chat assistant that I created that's trained on my own writing style and voice and tone. And I use it all the time for copy editing and making sure that, well, one, as you can probably tell, I ramble a lot and I go off on all these tangents. So it helps me sort of like narrow my focus when I can just dump in a really rough draft and then just say, hey, like clean this up for me, take out all the repetition, make sure I'm actually threading the needle where it needs to be threaded, that sort of thing. Okay, so this article here, I'm just going to open this up in a new tab so I can show you. But a professional lawyer, he has a blog, and honestly, I only saw this one, so please don't judge me if some of his other articles aren't savory. I'm not exactly sure. But he wrote this article called In AI We Trust, Part 2, where basically he asked a couple different questions here. So I'll show you the examples in just a second, but he put Claude 3.5, which is their latest model, their most advanced one that was just announced, to the test to see if it could act as a Supreme Court judge or act as a law clerk. And basically, sort of to summarize it quickly for you, he asked Claude to decide on a lot of I think it was all of the Supreme Court cases that have been judged up to this point in the year in the United States. And out of the 37 cases that he gave it, the Claude acting as a Supreme Court judge adjudicated 27 of them the exact same way that the actual Supreme justices did. And for the other 10, his own sort of commentary on this, he thought that Claude actually gave a more convincing ruling in some of those cases. So, he went on to experiment and have Claude come up with some novel legal standards as well based on some of these rulings. So if you're interested, I'm not going to go through all of this as we're sitting here together, because that would just be, that would probably be a little painful for everybody, but I'm just going to get down to the part where, so he wrote this section, but can Claude actually think? Because again, I said before, AI tools, they're just mimicking sort of the intelligence, right? Artificial intelligence. And one thing is a lot of people say that they can't come up with novel thought or new creations or things like that. Some of the specially trained medical AI, which, is a whole other topic again, but they're coming up with new proteins and drugs and stuff all the time that are new and novel and things that we haven't invented. So it's definitely possible. But he goes through this whole exercise. So he told Claude to adjudicate the case, right? He input 4 PDFs, all the legal briefs for this entire case leading up to the actual ruling. So he left that out and he said, please read all these briefs and write a 3-paragraph judicial opinion resolving this particular case. And he did kind of guide it a little bit. I want you to focus your attention on the appropriate legal standards, so on and so forth. So he gave it some legal jargon, right? Some guidance with expert sort of views on this subject matter, so that I can then say, okay, this person wants me to act in this certain way. I know I need to respond with this kind of language, and briefs are usually written in this fashion. So then it gives an output here. Again, you can read through sort of this. I'm just going to go through what he did. So then he asks it to do some more advanced things. He wants it to create its own legal standard and then compare itself to what was actually adjudicated here. It gives this whole thing. I don't know. I don't have a legal background. I have a technological background, so you would have to be the judge of this. He says this is correct. And then he goes into, so on and so forth. He just keeps digging and going deeper and deeper down the rabbit hole until eventually he wants it to create a legal standard, a creative legal standard that was not proposed, but that has merit. And, it generates a new legal standard out of the blue. And of course, he seemed to be very impressed by this. But again, I don't have a basis for whether it was impressive or not, but you can judge for yourself reading this. Let's see. I'm going to check a few questions here. Let's see. Did I use the usual presentation generators to create my material? Oh, well, thank you very much. I actually made this up myself, believe it or not. So I do have a little bit of design experience as well. So this was created by me. I did get a little inspiration from an Adobe template, and then I just kind of recreated it from scratch inside of Google Slides. So no AI. It was Kyle AI, if you want to say say that. All right. The AI app that talks to you. Are you referring to the one that I showed on my phone, Carolina? If so, that's just ChatGPT. That's their mobile app. So you're able to talk to it via the mobile app that way. Again, you can download it for free. You can use it for free. I think their voice capabilities, you're able to chat with their base voice model for free, and then the paid tier we'll get access to their more advanced one that's coming out later this year.
Hey, Kyle, this conversation, people, when I did this, a lot of people ask it, but it's there. As I understood, there's no difference in the quality of the answers, and the difference is that there's a limit of conversation, and sometimes it takes more time to answer. It gets thinking a little bit more in the free version, but that's the same quality as understood.
Yeah, and especially now. Now, like I did mention this a little bit before, but all of the companies offer their most advanced models for free now, which didn't used to be the case even earlier this year. I think around May is essentially when all of them said, okay, we're opening up our most advanced capabilities to everyone. You just get, maybe you only have 10 turns in a conversation every 4 hours or something, or they slow it down a little bit for you. But yeah, you're right.
Yeah, that's good.
Yep. So let's see here. One more little topic I want to hit, and then I think I'm going to be wrapping up. So one thing I like to say too is that humans plus AI, this really is like the way forward. Again, these tools tend to work better when it's paired with human expertise and experience. So you as legal professionals, me as like a technology educator, things along those lines. You get a lot more out of it in your profession because you have that discernment of what is good or not, right? You can kind of tell when the quality of something is high, or when you to maybe use a less savory term, but like your BS detector kind of goes off. You're like, I don't know, that doesn't really look good. But sometimes that's helpful in and of itself, right? Like you get to say, no, I don't think that output is good. We're going to go in a different direction. But it's helping you think through your own thought process and clarify sort of your own needs a little bit better. So there is a very prolific educator. His name is Ethan Mollick. I'm going to open up his article in another tab too. He's a professor at the Wharton School of Business in Pennsylvania, and he has done a ton of AI research, a lot of helpful information, especially in the education and business space. But again, a lot of these concepts can be applied elsewhere. He wrote this paper that coined this term, the jagged frontier. So centaurs and cyborgs on the jagged frontier. I'm going to walk through just the basics of this because I think it's an important concept. But this whole article that he wrote was kind of a companion piece to a research paper that he and a bunch of other people performed. And basically what it found, and this was back in 2023, so we're millennia ahead in terms of AI timeframes, right? This was back still when like GPT 3.5 was the main tool. You had to pay for GPT 4, so on and so forth. But they did the survey of about 750-ish consultants at an elite consultant firm. They had them perform 18 tasks, consulting tasks of varying levels of difficulty. And, in short, they basically found that everyone that used AI, AI is kind of the tide that lifts all ships. Quality improvement across all of these 18 tasks improved for everybody that used it over those that did not. And they found, these are just some of like the highlights of the numbers, but on average, the people that use these AI tools, and granted, they were not given any prompting tricks, they weren't given anything other than, here's this tool, use it to complete your work. And on average, they finished 12% more tasks. They did so 25% more quickly, so more efficiently, and at 40% higher quality. Now that could be subjective, right? But the company that was rating the quality of work rated the quality of work 40% higher, which is, if I could improve myself 40%, that's a pretty amazing amount to improve by, I would say. So what is the jagged frontier? Well, the way Ethan Mollick explains it is you can imagine human capabilities of any task that they're trying to complete in this circle, right? This is kind of our general knowledge tasks. It could be applied to any industry, any area of expertise. Then this squiggly line that I drew on here, this is the line of AI capabilities. And depending on what task you ask it, maybe you ask it for something that intersects. This is what he calls being on the frontier of capabilities. So again, anything within the circle is what any human could do. And then when you get outside of the circle, that's something that we might struggle with or AI might be able to do a little bit better. So task on the frontier, you might ask a question when you're using these tools and you find it just nails it directly. Great, good use case. A task inside the frontier is something that, humans could do, but AI can also do maybe at a higher level. Maybe they help you do things, again, that much more efficiently, produce higher quality output of work, all of those different statistics that we just looked at. But then we still have tasks outside the frontier where humans can complete them, maybe even easily, and AI struggles to do them. And again, my sort of like, the whole reason I'm going through this spiel is that you still are figuring out what these tools are good at, what they're capable of doing. And again, you only learn that by spending the time with them. So let's take a look at kind of one example of maybe like a naive approach sort of to this. This is actually an example that came up at Boston College. So I had a professor back when AI first kind of came out. I talked to them about what...
Caio, sorry. The translation is 20 minutes. If you can
thank you.
flash it.
Yes. Sorry. I'll have to fix that after the fact.
Thank you.
Well, at least it's still working this long. That's pretty good. I'm happy with it.
And the translation is perfect. It's very good.
Yeah,
that's amazing.
It is amazing. Yep. Okay. So back when these tools were initially announced, I kind of saw this as an opportunity. I knew that we needed to understand it, especially it's a unique situation, right? We've got the pedagogical reasons at a university. We're a law school. So some of these students are going to go on to potentially create policy around using some of these tools. So, it was an important thing to understand. It's kind of going a little wild over here, I noticed. It's an important thing to understand. Faculty are going to need to know how to approach it from all of these angles as well. And, better inform our students how to use it for when they go out into the legal profession and use specialized tools there. So a lot of implications there. And I was given this prompt and sort of a detailed response from a faculty member who, let's see, I'm just seeing the translated text go kind of nuts. Let's see. All right, I'll keep an eye on it. Pedro, can you let me know if it's not working properly?
Yeah.
I might have extended past my my capabilities here.
No, it's perfect. It's
Okay,
going on.
good. So he asked ChatGPT, the free version, 3.5, this question. And this was all the information that he gave it. I wrote this, I actually wrote this article, a technical question on immigration law with all of the information in it, with an additional response for myself to kind of give some tips for how he could have prompted this a little bit better to get the right answer the first time. And I'll get into that in just a second. But so his initial reaction to this, ChatGPT, he basically asked it to write a brief for him. And, his reaction was in all caps, this is at best misleading and actually pretty clearly wrong. He highlighted that, AI missed some crucial nuance and things along those lines. So basically, I decided, okay, well, let me see how I can do with this. So ChatGPT has this feature where you can actually share prompts. So back in September, I decided to give it the extra background information. So I had an additional conversation with him. I said, okay, what were you trying to do? And what would have been helpful, if you were handing this off to an associate, what would have been helpful to give to them to also help them along their way? So I added that in as background information. So when you're prompting these things, you can ask your general question, but if you kind of already know in your head, additional information that would help it along its way, you should just put it in there because it's only going to help, especially with the context limit windows being as big as they are. So here's the extra background information. Instead of uploading, because at the time you couldn't upload documents to ChatGPT 3.5, so you give it the language of the statute, you just copy and paste. And then you give it some requirements, the formatting of the output that you want to see. So the memo should be this long, it should be polite and professional. And this is an important piece, which I'm going to talk about later, but I want you to think step by step through the question. this is a quick tip in case I don't get to it. I know we're an hour and a half in now, but this is a way to get the models to think out loud their thought process. Well, thought process in quotes. But when you ask the models to think step by step, then they say, great, let's go through it. And then they outline kind of what they're thinking about doing first. Again, remember, they're next token predictors, and they look at the entire thing that you've put in and they've generated in order to inform the next word. So when they start giving themselves kind of a guidepost to follow to give the final response, this is going to improve a lot of times the quality of the output. So it sort of walks through step by step. Okay, here's what I'm going to do. Here are some things that I'm thinking about. Given these details, like here's some questions I'm asking myself about this. And okay, great. I've got all this. Let's write the memorandum. Let's write the brief. And so, this turned out, I worked with one of our legal research librarians or one of our teaching librarians to kind of help me come up with some different legal terms to, again, help this prompt be successful. And she thought this was a much better response and answered the question that was originally asked here. So then, then I go on, I kind of change gears and I ask it to be, to take on the role as an administrative law professor. And let's just pretend I didn't have the relevant information first. Can you walk me through step by step? Walk me step by step through the process I should take as an upcoming attorney to arrive to the solution here. So it's great. Always happy to help. And then it walks me through the process. And I was sitting there. Her name is Karen Breda. Shout out Karen, who's my colleague here in the library. And, she noticed that it left out a pretty important piece. So again, as someone who didn't have the background knowledge, or maybe like a student, if they were asking these kinds of things for help like studying or learning about new materials, they might have left out a couple of details here and there, but by and large, it got like most of the information correct. So with the updated sort of like prompt, it then adds in some information about Chevron deference, which is something that she brought up here. So that's just one kind of example of ways to improve prompting. And that article I wrote gives a little bit more background into that in case you're interested. Okay, so try and land the ship here. We've got a few more things left. So a couple of key takeaways from this particular one. This is actually just talking about the example I just gave, but prompt design and giving it the relevant context is pretty important for getting the best responses possible. AI is still relevant today, but it excels as like a virtual assistant, as a colleague, a co-intelligence, but it's not a repository of substantive knowledge, especially for law. And that's always something to keep in the back of your mind. For legal reasoning, human expertise is always going to be playing a crucial role, especially for the current state of these models, where, if you just ask it a very basic legal question, chances are it's probably going to either hallucinate or give you a very surface level answer. And when you can tap into, again, the sort of the underlying way that these things work, you'll know that if I provided the context, the documents up front, it's going to do a much better job for me. And so next steps, I talk about that in the article, but adding the additional context, all of these things I've kind of said before, so I'm just going to keep breezing through that. All right, so a few more things about prompting fundamentals. So this is more for how you can actually prompt these tools to get the most out of them. So you might have heard the term prompt engineering. Again, I argue you don't need that as much anymore. You can ask simple questions, but some of these concepts are kind of like the tried and true that are still working today. So the first thing is just a term, system prompts. So I talked to you about the fact that this is what's fed into the system behind the scenes. So Claude's system prompt here, I'm just going to open this up. This is a post on Twitter. So this person happens to work at Anthropic, and she posted this in March, that this is actually what Claude is given behind the scenes. So you can see it's actually not too long, but this is what goes in before every prompt that you enter into Claude. So this is always kept in context so that it can help you be a helpful chat assistant. Some of these services will allow you to create your own custom prompts that you feed into it. And let's see. Maybe I'll show you mine later on. I also, on the same web page here, let's see. Sorry, I'll get to. This is a resource I built for our faculty here to learn about how to use this. I talk about custom instructions. I'll throw this in the chat in case you're interested. But this describes all this stuff in terms of like what ChatGPT will allow you to do. And here's my custom prompt that I feed into ChatGPT every time, kind of reminding it what it is, how it works, that sort of thing. So if you're interested, you could check that out. I see a couple questions I've missed here. Which AI vehicle do I like the best? So personally, I go back and forth. It's kind of a leapfrog situation. Every time a company releases a new model, they tend to be better than all the previous ones, which is kind of a unique quirk of how these things work. So right now, honestly, I've had a lot of fun talking and working with Claude. I've found the quality to be extremely high. And the reason being, they just announced their latest model like last week, I think, or in the last week or two. And it's fantastic. But I do pay, the one I pay for is ChatGPT. So if that tells you anything, I'm still kind of in the ChatGPT camp. I tend to prefer the responses there. But I do like Claude quite a bit. I'm going to see if I can refresh this translation. It seems to be jumping around quite a bit. Sorry about that. Okay, hopefully that isn't so jumpy. I apologize. Okay, and yes, system prompts do count towards your token limit. So let's look at prompt structure. Again, this links to another article that I wrote about it, but in general, the prompt structure, you don't need all of these components, but sometimes these can help kind of massage the AI to give you the right output that you're looking for. So we've got role, task, format, and context. And very simply, a role is exactly what it sounds like. Act as an expert blank, act as a copywriter, act as a Supreme Court judge, so on and so forth. That sort of primes the pump to say, hey, like this is the kind of tone these particular people use. This is the kind of language that they use. It helps sort of inform, again, that predictive nature of these tools to choose certain words and content to give to you over others. Then you've got the task. That's just the prompt. That's just what you want it to do. The format is typically when you want like a specific kind of response. Let's say it's a brief, maybe you give it instructions about how that should be formatted. You're giving it some extra rules and guidelines to follow. And then the context is just everything else. That could be uploaded documents. That could be you just giving some extra descriptive information about how you want it to proceed. But the context is kind of a catch-all for just extra things that you think would be helpful for the chat tool to have. And, again, I go in super depth in this particular article here that you could read through. It talks about a couple of different things you can add to prompts too, and it has a whole appendix for prompt examples and things you could pull from if you'd like. So that's in the slides that I shared earlier. Another aspect of prompting, something that I alluded to again, is this chain of thought method, the think step by step. And again, the whole point is to get generative AI to show its work. So chain of thought, I asked an art generation tool called Midjourney I just put in chain of thought, and this is what it gave me, which was kind of interesting. But the magic phrase here is think step by step. And if I had to pick one phrase to remember in terms of like when people say, you should look at this one particular sentence. This always gives you better output. This is really the only one that works pretty consistently is the think step by step. And there's actually whole research articles and stuff like that that have been written on it. But again, it kickstarts this process of the chain of thought, which is just getting the AI to think out loud inside of the prompt, inside of the output, so that it has that loaded up in its context for you. Here's a couple other phrases that also work, some kind of more recent that have come up, but this top one, before you answer, make a list of wrong assumptions, check your premises at every point, then make a list of wrong assumptions that people sometimes make about the concepts included in the question, then provide your answer checking against the premises you've identified. Kind of a mouthful, but basically this was found to get around some of the reasoning pitfalls sometimes. You know, you might see online like people tricking these tools with very simple like word games or logic puzzles or things like that. Or for like legal issues, like more complex reasoning, things along those lines. This is a good way for, again, to like list out like, oh, I shouldn't be thinking about these things because these are incorrect assumptions or whatever. And it just helps it to, again, create a more informed output for you. Here's a couple other ones. I'm not going to go through them all because I'm trying to get you all out of here at a reasonable time. Another prompt fundamental is something known as in-shot prompting. You might hear it as like 0 shot, 1 shot, 2 shot, 3 shot. All that means when you see the in represents the number, obviously. This is just a way to give it some examples of how you want the output to be. So this works really well when you know you require a specific output every time, or specific formatting or language. So you could give it like an example conversation. If you just give it one, that would be called one shot. Let's say you wanted it to generate, I'm just going to pick kind of an arbitrary example, but maybe you wanted it to generate song lyrics. Well, maybe you give it 3 songs and say, this is the style of song, this is the structure of how these songs work that I like. Now generate a song for me about, you know, the cosmos or black holes, or, you know, pick any topic that you want. But the point being that you're giving it specific examples, structured examples, where you actually will put in like annotations. You'll say, so if I go back actually to my interactive example here, an example of that might look like, okay, here's the initial prompt, and you would copy and paste this as part of your prompt. User, do this, AI response, and then you actually are like pasting this in as part of your prompt. You might do this 2 or 3 times with examples that you know are going to be beneficial to you, and then you ask the AI to actually do whatever task that it wants to do, or that you want it to do. Okay, some final tips here. Remember, I've been a broken record about this, but LLMs are autoregressive next, I'll say word, you know, we don't think in tokens, next word predictors with limited context windows, asterisk for now. Using LLMs, again, does not require technical knowledge. You don't have to be a computer engineer to use these things. This helps for humans too. When you have a huge problem or a huge set of tasks you set out to accomplish, breaking them down into smaller components typically will yield better results too. If you wanted to create some legal reasoning for you, maybe you wanted to come up with like a new decision or help you, you know, if you wanted to be a Supreme Court justice and adjudicate something, maybe you don't have it come up with a whole decision at once. Maybe you break that down into different sections and have it work on it from there and go back and forth with the tool. So this other tip, you know, because LLMs have a limited context, don't be afraid to bail or kind of just get out of a conversation and start over. This is especially true if it starts to tell you things that you're not like a big fan of, you want it to go in a different direction. A lot of these tools will have an edit feature. So I'll just give you a practical example here. So let's say, you know, if I didn't like the title and I didn't want to keep moving forward, I could just click this little edit icon and then, you know, maybe I wanted to create 10 titles. I could just start the whole thing over from that point, and then you're off and running. So that kind of takes out some of the potential negative output that it's giving you if it's not following your guidelines, or the quality isn't quite where you want it. You can just go back up to a point where it was doing well and start over from there. Again, I always like to think AI plus humans is the path forward. This isn't us versus them. I don't think, it's probably going to be this sort of thing where it's not going to replace people in their jobs or anything like that. I think what it's going to do is, for the people that do know how to use them, they're just going to have a leg up for kind of the near term. And at some point, you're not going to need you're not going to need to know these special prompting tips or anything like that. Sometimes dealing with AI, learning about it, you learn very quickly that because it moves so quickly, by the time tomorrow rolls around, this whole conversation might be out of date. Hopefully not, for all of our sakes, but it does move very quickly. But yeah, my whole point, AI plus humans, like that is, that's kind of how we all come together and I think elevate, we're going to elevate the output of AI and vice versa. And yeah, I think just think about some things like in your own either personal life or work life, like what is tedious to you, what is monotonous, or what is something that, based off of everything you've learned tonight, that you can just offload or like attempt to see if AI can handle this for you. As you learn some of these tools, they all have free versions. Try each one, test out your same prompt in each one of the chat tools and see which one you like better. Each one kind of has a different tone and writing style and things along those lines. So maybe you resonate with one over another. This is something that happens to me quite a bit, but sometimes the beauty of using AI is just helping you articulate your own thoughts and honing in your own ability to sort of communicate really clearly what it is you're looking for. What idea are you trying to convey? Just that back and forth conversation. Again, they can be very conversational. That can be very helpful as an exercise just in and of itself. Okay, so let's see, what's next? Again, this is already here, right? Like we're already working with this to unlock kind of like new heights for our own self. Like we're getting to higher potentials than we could have previously for those that use these tools. And it's really just getting started. All of these foundational models, the most powerful models that all these companies have released, they're already amazingly helpful, even if we're still figuring out, where they fit into our lives and our work. But even if they only get a little bit better, like let's say that, that curve of performance doesn't continue going up forever, even the current state of them, I think, is incredibly helpful in my opinion. All of the major players in this space, by the way, have gone on record recently saying that there's no sign of progress slowing down. And in fact, a lot of them are kind of alluding to later this year, people's minds being blown. So you have to take that with a grain of salt. They are the developers and the owners of these companies and so on and so forth. So they kind of have a stake in saying that and to build up that hype. But, this is across the industry here. So, I'm sure there's a little grain of truth to something that they're saying there. And again, like a lot of these models, there are new training modalities coming where they've all been trained on text before. Well, now they're being trained on, different senses, sound, sight, with video and images and audio and all that kind of thing. So the idea here is that they're going to have a little bit better of a worldview, even more than they do now, to just be that much more intelligent moving forward. And this is already happening too, but specialized models, I didn't even really talk about some of the ones in the legal field on this front, but there are specialized models, especially in like document creation and storage and things like that, as well as legal research that are super, super helpful in the field. And, they're already, they're also helping human experts in this field, but they're surpassing them in a lot of ways too, just in terms, again, of that efficiency and how quickly that they could parse information and again, this is especially true in like the medical and scientific field, where there's some really cool research going on there and breakthroughs happening all the time. Here's just a quick slide. I've kind of already said all these things throughout this particular talk, so I'm not going to spend much time here. And then I'll just end on kind of one final prompt, helpful example. So one other way I use this is reviewing and critiquing my written work. So I can say, hey, act as a skeptical co-author in blank field with experience here, and review this content for, you know, accuracy, originality. Is it bringing new ideas to the table, so on and so forth. So, and then you paste in your document, and then you have a back and forth with the chat assistant to improve your work. So this is something that, you know, I think, again, this is low hanging fruit. This could, you know, this could be used for like emails, or if you're trying to create some new research in a field, or just come up with some new content for people that will be helpful. This is going to be a way to very quickly and easily, again, get that second opinion, get some more relevant content, and potentially improve whatever work that you had going. So that's all I had for today. Really, thank you all for hanging around. That was we turned a 1 hour webinar into 2 hours, which I'm known to do. All right.
Okay.
Well, yeah, take it easy, start slow. I mean, you know, I've been working with this for almost, you know, the year and a half that's been out, 2 years, on a daily basis. So if you get in and it gets a little frustrating, like, don't worry, it does take time to get used to some of these things.
Very good. Kyle, thank you so much for sharing your expertise. We're grateful beyond words. Thank you.
Yeah, it was great. Thank you for the opportunity.
Okay.
Thank you so much for everyone. Thank you.
Bye all.
Bye-bye. See you.
Bye.